Good morning. Hi. Yeah, let's let the hubbub settle down a little bit. Good morning again, and a joyful and fulfilling new year to all of you. And I know we have at least a couple of visitors today, and a special welcome to you. Our minister, the Reverend Katie McCage Lucas, is off today. I am a lay member of the congregation. I am a Hindu. But for the past 27 years, I've also been an enthusiastic Unitarian Universalist. Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal religion. We are united not by a creed, not by a common belief, but by our covenant, which is our promise to live and act in a certain way. We demonstrate our religion, not by words, but by our actions. We have a set of values that guide these actions, and they're printed in the back of the order of service, if you haven't seen those already. Under the arc of these values, there is latitude for personal interpretation, for personal revelations. Today, I will talk about some of my revelations. A little background. Both Unitarianism and Universalism arose more than 200 years ago as non-orthodox creeds within mainline Christianity, and then evolved into full-fledged religions. The two merged in 1961 to give us Unitarian Universalism. Unitarians question the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, which states that God exists in three equal parts: God the Father, God the Son in the person of Jesus Christ, and God the Holy Spirit. This doctrine was formulated 300 years after Jesus' death. And Unitarians maintained that this doctrine was a human invention and that God is one, hence Unitarian, not Trinitarian. Universalists rejected the doctrine of predestination, which was promulgated just 500 years ago by John Calvin, who was one of the leaders of the Protestant Reformation. Calvin maintained that some of us are predestined by God for the fires of hell, and nothing we do in our lifetime can change this. Universalists contended that God loves all his children and will open the gates of heaven for all of us, will save all of us, hence universal salvation. Unitarian ministers were generally well-educated over the years, the last couple of 100 years. They were well-educated, formally ordained, and delivered scholarly sermons to urban congregations. Unitarian preachers were often self-taught, rode on horseback, and preached in rural communities. Unitarians emphasize the use of reason in understanding the scriptures. Universalists emphasize God's love for us all. I like to say that Unitarians shed light and Universalists shed warmth. Our religion, Unitarian Universalism, was born out of that light and warmth. We have pretty high standards to live up to.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Charles. My pronouns are she and her. Beth Jordan will light our chalice this morning. We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves. Also to be welcoming to whomever we meet and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together. Please rise as you are willing and able and join us in the opening song, number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. The words of the Reverend Dr. Michael Tino. Recently, I've heard more and more people wondering what is the place of covenant and accountability in Unitarian Universalism. In some circles, they have become almost dirty words, signs that we are somehow abandoning the individualist faith that so many people mistakenly think we are. And yet, both of these concepts are central to our faith. Covenant consists of the sacred promises we make to one another. It is not a fixed set of beliefs, but rather a living understanding of how we are in community together. Covenants define the practices of Unitarian Universalism as well as what we are striving to create together. As a faith movement, our congregations are bound to each other in covenant. That covenant is expressed in Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws. It lives there because covenants and bylaws, unlike creeds, are meant to be changeable. As our understanding of faith deepens, as our understanding of our world develops, and as the circle of our faith widens to welcome in those who have too long been marginalized, we must adapt the promises that hold us together. These are good promises, solid promises that if we keep them will help us center our faith in love and live from values we claim: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. Please join me in saying the Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church Covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, thus to be covenant with one another.
Good morning. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. no hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
Good morning. My name is Gloria Miller, and I am the Director of Religious Education here at Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church, and my pronouns are she, hers. Our time for all ages today is a historical story, a Unitarian Universalist historical rather than mythical story. Olympia Brown was a suffragist, the first woman to graduate from a theological school, and the first woman minister in the United States. She was born January 5th, 1835, precisely 190 years ago today, in a log cabin in Prairie Ronde, Michigan, and she was the oldest of 4 children. Her parents were farmers in what was then considered the frontier, so in a way, she was born a pioneer. The drive her mother had instilled in Olympia inspired her to finish high school at age 14 and to continue her education at the college level. She studied at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, which was among the most rigorous academic institutions that a young woman could attend. Her excitement was tempered by the restrictions that were placed on women. Perhaps the best example of the school's thinking was the words of her chemistry professor. "You are not expected to remember all of this, only enough to make you intelligent in conversation." Brown, who already knew she could meet the challenges of a higher education, looked elsewhere. Antioch College in Ohio caught her interest. It was the first co-educational college in the United States to offer the same curriculum to both men and women. And so after graduating from Antioch, she decided her calling was to become a minister. Several schools rejected her application until the theological school of St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, agreed to admit her as a student. However, Dr. Ebenezer Fisher, dean of the theological school, tried to discourage her from enrolling. And while he believed that the ministry was not a proper place for a woman, he also feared that hordes of women would want to follow in Brown's footsteps, and they would destroy his small, struggling school. Brown faced opposition from fellow students and wives of the faculty. The men in her class worried that admitting women to the ministry would diminish their roles. She took it as a challenge. People do not become pioneers by giving up easily. While a student, she preached in nearby Ogdensburg whenever she had a break from school, and a church in Hoyvelton offered her a job as a pastor. But she wanted to be ordained by a full denominational authority. While the Northern Association of Universalists were in session in Malone, New York, she presented her case for ordination. And on June 25, 1863, the Universalist Church of America ordained Brown the first fully ordained woman minister. Dr. Fisher, who had opposed her at St. Lawrence, participated in the ceremony. Brown later paid tribute to Fisher and the other somewhat reluctant men. She said, "This was the first time that the Universalists, or indeed any denomination, has formally ordained a woman as a preacher. They took that stand, a remarkable one for the day, which shows the courage of these men." In 1864, she accepted a position as a minister with the Universalist Church in Weymouth Landing, Massachusetts. She went on to pastor in Marshfield, Montpelier, Vermont, Connecticut, and Racine, Wisconsin. Upon taking her position in Racine, she wrote, "Those who may read this will think it strange that I could only find a field in a rundown or comatose church. But they must remember that the pulpits of all the prosperous churches were already occupied by men and were looked forward to as the goal of all the young men coming into the ministry, with whom I, at first the only woman preacher in the denomination, had to compete. All I could do was take some place that had been abandoned by others and make something of it. And this I was only too glad to do." While she was still in her first ministry, she met Susan B. Anthony, who persuaded her to work for women's suffrage. And being a skilled organizer for many years, she did balance her home life with her duties as a minister and a suffragist. She raised a son and a daughter. However, at 52, she left full-time ministry to work for getting women the vote. And after the 19th Amendment passed, she was one of the few early pioneers who was still alive to cast her vote. The last years of her life were devoted to working for world peace, and she became a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Indeed, 190 years after her birth, over 60% of UU ministers are women. Brown continues to inspire, and the flame of her spirit burns on. Our keeper of the flame today is Lana. We pass this flame of religious freedom from generation to generation. Lord,
Each week, we join with one another to celebrate our joys and offer support for our concerns and sorrows. This morning, as we light our candles, please remember that thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of that candle will not be shortened. If you would like to come forward to light a candle, know that we hold you and your thoughts with our own. If you would like a candle brought to you, please raise your hand, and I will light the first 2 candles for our brothers and sisters in Las Vegas and in New Orleans.
Today's meditation is on the prayer of St. Francis. St. Francis lived in the 12th century AD. It is unlikely that he wrote this prayer. The first recorded instance of this prayer was in 1912 in France, and the author is unknown. But I find this prayer beautiful, and it has UU sentiments, Hindu sentiments, universal sentiments. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Lord, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying to selfishness that we attain eternal life. Today's reading is about Theodore Parker, one of the big guys in American Unitarianism. Theodore Parker was a Unitarian minister who was born in 1810 and lived for only 50 years. But in his short life, Parker helped to reshape American Unitarianism from what it was in the 1830s to what it is today, 200 years later. In the early 1800s, American Unitarians considered themselves to be fully Christian, and they called their religion Unitarian Christianity. Of course, being Unitarian, not Trinitarian, they did not consider Jesus as Son of God, but they did look at him as a special human being and the mediator of their salvation. They also considered biblical miracles to be revelations of God's power and intentions. But this was changing. William Ellery Channing, an early pillar of American Unitarianism, began to preach the use of reason while reading the scriptures. This was a novel concept because it encouraged personal interpretation of the Word of God. Ralph Waldo Emerson, of whom you might have heard, who was also an ordained Unitarian minister, declared that there were sources of wisdom, spiritual wisdom, beyond the Bible. Parker pushed the envelope further. In a landmark sermon delivered in 1841 called The Permanent and the Transient in Christianity, Parker emphasized that while the teachings of Jesus, be merciful, love thy neighbor, don't throw the first stone, while these teachings are permanent, the miracles and traditions that have grown up around him are not. Parker had also come to believe that spiritual truths are self-evident, open to all humans, and no religion, including Christianity, can slap a patent on them. He maintained that God should be experienced intuitively and personally. In other sermons and writings that followed, Parker urged his listeners to let their conscience guide their actions. He took his words to heart, and as he probed his own conscience, his attention and priorities shifted from theological arguments to human rights, including universal education, reformation of the criminal justice system, and elevation of the status of women, and we are still working on some of these. Parker defined true democracy as what? Government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. He wrote that one. Words that were used by Lincoln in Gettysburg in 1863. Parker felt that slavery was incompatible with true democracy, and the abolition of slavery became his greatest passion. He advocated disobeying the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 that commanded that even non-slaveholding states, such as Massachusetts, had to help capture and return escaped slaves to their masters in the South. He was an active member of the Boston Vigilance Committee that helped hide escaped slaves and move them on to Canada. For his efforts, Parker was indicted by a federal grand jury, though he was never prosecuted. Parker died in 1860, a year before the start of the Civil War, without seeing the results of his and others' fight against slavery. But he was confident of the inevitable success of the anti-slavery efforts, confident that morality and justice will prevail. A few years before his death, he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing this just a little bit, he wrote, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one, and my eyes can't see that far. But I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure that the arc bends towards justice." The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, a sentence quoted both by MLK and by President Obama. How many of you knew that these words were written by Parker 150 years ago? Sharing our abundance. The following words I've adapted from the Reverend Victoria Weinstein. She wrote, "We all make our yearly pledges to support the work of this church. These pledges are critical, but they are individual and invisible. We also pass the plate every Sunday as a visible expression of community, of our ties to this church and to each other. The offering will now be gratefully collected." Skip the announcements. please join me in blessing the offering? This gift of the abundance of my heart blesses me, our ministries, and the world.
It's very Unitarian Universalist of us to make you wonder if we missed the announcements, isn't it? Join us this Wednesday, January 8th at 5:45 p.m. for a delicious dinner at the church. It's all about great food and even better fellowship. Our menu includes kid-friendly favorites, hearty omnivore options, and vegetarian and vegan dishes. There's something for everyone. Bring your family, invite your friends, and enjoy a warm, welcoming meal together. All are welcome, and we can't wait to see you there. And after the Vespers on Wednesday night, enjoy the church's first team trivia night hosted by Cliff Grimm and Chris Rubley. Teams will be assigned randomly from those that attend. Snacks and drinks and prizes will be there. And as a practice, here's a trivia question based on information in Alok's message today. Don't answer the question if you know. Which country is the music of the closing hymn identified with? Come to trivia night with the answer and win a prize. No cheating. Looking to build deeper connections, our small groups at Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church provide a chance for meaningful conversations and exploration of life-spec questions. Interested in joining a group for spring sessions? Scan the QR code on the screen to let us know. Once we gauge interest, we'll share sign-up details and group options. Next Sunday, January 12th, we'll begin a book discussion on Stephen Prothero's God is Not One. Join us on the second and fourth Sundays of the month at 9:30 a.m. for a deep dive into the eight major religions and their distinctive contributions to life's big questions. The book is available at local bookstores or on Amazon. Are you interested? Let us know via the QR code on the screen or the link in the weekly email to help us make childcare scheduling accommodations. Also next Sunday, families, parents, and children are invited to a family potluck at 12:30 p.m. in Cockrell Hall. Bring a dish to share and enjoy great food and fellowship. While the kids play under supervision, parents can join discussion on parenting topics. Don't miss this wonderful opportunity to connect, learn, and have fun. And after today's service, join us for a special coffee and fellowship. Hispanics Advancing Culture and Education, HACAE, has provided fresh refreshments in honor of Dia de los Tres Ramos Magos. I tried. Where's Sonia? Did I do it? This day marks the end of the Christmas season in many Spanish-speaking countries, celebrated with parades, gifts, and festivities. Let's come together to celebrate this beautiful tradition. And finally, stay updated with everything happening at the church by subscribing to our weekly newsletter. Sent every Tuesday, it's packed with news, updates, and event details. Sign up using the QR code on the screen or visit bauuc.org. Don't miss out.
I walked into this room for the first time on Sunday, February the 22nd, 1998. I was a seeker on a spiritual journey. My younger sister had developed aggressive breast cancer at 36 years of age and had recently died. She had a painful battle with the disease. Towards the end, she would ask me, why have I been chosen to die? I have 2 children I need to raise. One day she died, but her question did not. For the first time in my life, I was forced to seek answers in the spiritual realm. I was born a Hindu, but I knew little about my religion and had so far felt no poorer for my ignorance. Now I found myself studying the Hindu scriptures in my quest for an answer. I was confused, I was depressed. I've always been a bit of a loner and happy to be one. But now I felt an almost palpable need for community. That is when I found the Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church. You, the congregation, became my community. You took me in. In my darkness, you offered me support and encouraged me, a Hindu, to work on my answers with no encouragement that they would match yours. 8 months later, I gave my first talk from this pulpit. By now, I was a Hindu member of the congregation. And in the talk, I said, what is it about us, about this religion called Unitarian Universalism, that makes it different from all others? All churches, I said, offer two things. They offer fellowship and they offer worship. But the two are not independent. In most churches, the fellowship comes at the price of the worship. Do they worship, and you get the fellowship. Reject the worship, and you lose the fellowship. That's just the way it is. The difference in this church is that we provide the fellowship and encourage you to work on your own worship. We support you while you seek your own answers, whatever they may be. So that was my first revelation. Clearly, our religion was distinctly different from most that I was familiar with. I kept digging, and each time I felt I had uncovered another nugget of personal wisdom, I would stand up here and explain my reasoning and conclusions. So next we come to a talk, and that must have been a couple of years after I joined. It was called simply God. That, the congregation then as now had people with a wide range of backgrounds and beliefs, actually even more so than we have today. And of course, we had no common vision of God, and many had no vision of God at all. We had a lot of atheists. So I said, people have asked me, which is true, as I'm sure they have asked you, how can we possibly function with so many beliefs coexisting in one church? The answer, of course, is simple. You see, the cause is not important to us. It is the effect that we are looking for. Does it really matter what I say I believe? Does professing to be a Hindu, a Christian, a Buddhist, or an atheist really say anything about the way I live my life? After all, light from the same God shone on the monks of the Inquisition as they tore a person apart on the rack, as shown on Mother Teresa. Light from the same God shone on Mahatma Gandhi and on the man who killed him, for each considered himself a devout Hindu. No, I do not become godly by pointing at the light. I become godly by being worthy of its reflection. Every religion, I said, has its book about God. Read our book, they tell me, and you will find God. But in the final analysis, it is of no consequence to me if I find evidence of God in a book about God. The real question, the question that each of us has to ask ourselves is this: will they find evidence of God if they read a book about me? Then came a talk called Our Faith. I was still trying to understand what this religion is all about. And I said in that one, If I were to be led blindfolded into a synagogue, a mosque, a church, or a Hindu temple, it would take me no more than a couple of minutes to figure out which house of worship I was in. But I could sit in a UU sanctuary with my eyes wide open for a month of Sundays and still have no clue. What happens in this sanctuary on Sunday mornings does not fit the definition of worship by the standards of most religions. So the question must be asked, are we just faking it? Are we all form and no substance? Do we trivialize worship? No, I said, we do not. The reason our worship is different from that of others is because we are what I would call a second-order religion. So what's a first-order religion and what's a second-order religion? A first-order religion, in my opinion, starts as the religion of a tribe or a small group of people. It works nicely for that group because it is tailored to meet their specific needs, their specific spiritual needs, to explain the mysteries of their world in their times. Most of today's mainstream religions started as first-order religions. First-order religions are characterized by a God who has human qualities but superhuman abilities, including the ability to touch you with one finger and change the course of your life. This God casts a shadow upon the earth. In the most fundamental form of a first-order religion, the followers build a spiritual wall around that shadow. They live within this wall, always under the shadow of their God. Ardent followers of a first-order religion look up to their God. Their relationship to God is vertical, up and down, God superior and humans inferior. Their horizontal vision, their spiritual understanding of the world around them is restricted. It is filtered by the wall. They see through the wall. A successful first-order religion answers clearly and without hesitation the three questions that most humans ask at one time or another. Where did I come from? What is my purpose on this earth? Why am I here? And what will happen to me after I die? By providing answers to these questions, first-order religions have uplifted and comforted billions of human beings. They work. But not everyone is willing to live inside a fort, surrounded forever by a wall. Some of us, including you and me, climb to the top of the wall and dare to look over the parapet. What do they see? Well, you see men and women and children living out in the open on the plains with no walls around them. One day you screw up your courage, climb over the wall and join them. You find that now your gaze, your spiritual vision is limited only by the horizon. But you also discover that the horizon is just the illusion of a limit. With every step you take towards it, what does the horizon do? It moves one step away. You realize that the spiritual world is infinite. It is without boundaries. It is a world in which walls are an artificial encroachment. There is more. As you explore, you meet travelers who have trod other paths. At night, you sit around a campfire exchanging information. You find that some are in agreement with your understanding of the world, but some have different views. They have seen other aspects of this vast landscape. Gradually, you begin to understand that this diversity of experience, this diversity of vision, is a positive thing. For the experience of others enriches your own. Imagine how little of the spiritual world we would all see if we all walked in a group, if all of us walked exactly the same path. Okay, now we're going to jump about 8 years ahead. I was getting a little more, I knew a little bit more. So I gave a talk called Taking Our Measure. I said, I have heard many people say that deep down all religions are the same. Not true. All religions have two components, the sectarian and the universal. The sectarian deals with that religion's unique vision of the path to salvation. The universal deals with our earthly needs. We all long for justice and fairness, to love and to be loved, to live in peace with others. And so in addition to the purely sectarian, all religions have teachings and beliefs that are universal, the epitome of which is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. While the universal in all religions tries to deal with the present, the sectarian tells me where I came from and what will happen to me after I die. Questions that precede our birth and prophesize our fate after death. In most religions, unfortunately, the present, the universal, is framed in terms of the sectarian. We are urged to think and to live in a certain way because of what happened in the past and what might happen in the future. But letting the sectarian cast a shadow on the universal also gives justification for intolerance, even for killing in the name of God. We Unitarian Universalists have made a conscious decision to reject institutional sectarianism. Questions about life and death, about the past and the future may be important to many of us. But as a group, as a religion, we make a commitment to place the universal above the sectarian, to live truly in the present, to not let reality be overwhelmed by belief. Whew, that's a lot, isn't it? So these are my revelations I mentioned so far. We have climbed over the wall. We place goodness over godness, and we are rooted in this life, not in the next. These are my conclusions, and as they say, your mileage may vary. Now, I will end this talk with something I said, a sermon I did in 2019 called the UU Mind. Now I was looking inwards and forwards. Who are we and what is our purpose? And this is what I said. I think, and remember these are my conclusions, okay, so it may not apply to all. I think that what makes us instantly feel at home in a UU congregation is that we, you and I, are different from most people. Many of us have known that deep down our whole lives. We are the daydreamers and the bookworms. We are the nerds and the mystics. We think differently. We are concerned about issues that are of little significance to most other people, or we think about those issues in a different way. Many of us seem to live in a parallel, slightly different universe. We are connected to each other not by a creed, not by a shared belief, but by shared values. Values that emphasize the worth and equality of every individual, freedom of thought, and the freedom to express those thoughts, and stewardship, responsibility for this earth and all it contains. Each of us probably has a somewhat different interpretation of these values, but they're not distinctly separate interpretations. They overlap. And this overlap connects us to each other. It is this overlap that forms the strands of the net that holds us together. We are the outliers. We are different in our ways of thinking and believing. Some of us lead with the mind. These are the rational, the analytical, the data-driven, the pragmatic. Others lead with the heart. They are the intuitive, the spiritual, the mystical. Of course, most people are not all of one or the other, but one side of personality usually predominates. If the spiritual, mystical members of our congregations are, as the hippies might say, far out, then the rational, scientific ones, the nerds, are far in. The big group of people in the middle, people out there, does not easily relate to either the far outs or the far ins. Our passions can bring a glazed look into their eyes. But as Alan Watts wrote many years ago, the far outs and the far ins understand each other. That is why we are all here. Look around you. We may not wrestle with our questions in quite the same way, but we seem to wrestle with the same questions. Equity, freedom, responsibility. So how do we go about putting our values into practice? What is our purpose? Well, think of the majority of people out there, the people in the middle, as the mainstream of a great river. The mainstream carries the most water. The mainstream is powerful. It can engulf you, it can sweep you away, it can even drown you. But the mainstream does not carve the course of the river. The course of the river is carved by the water on the banks. And you know, often this water is shallow. It flows a little more gently. Sometimes it just stops and puddles. But this is the water that touches the earth on each side of the river. This is the water that changes the course of the river. We, you and I, are the water on the banks of the river of humanity. Carving the course of a river is a great responsibility. Which way do you want the river to go? Do we have a guidebook? Do we have a map? Yes, we do. It is our principles, our values. It is our vision of what we want the world to be. In fact, I don't think we need 3 words to summarize our principles. I can do it in 1 word. And that word is justice. We are primarily about justice. Justice towards the earth that we live on, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, justice towards the forests and the prairies and the oceans, and the creatures that live in them, and justice towards each other. Theodore Parker said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That may be. But justice does not happen in a vacuum. Justice does not happen by itself. Justice must be defended. It must be nurtured. Sometimes it must be sacrificed for. It seems to me that these days the river is flowing in the wrong direction. I have to believe that conscience and reason and justice will prevail. But I'm also convinced that for this to happen, people like you and me, by our voices and actions, will have to keep trying to redirect the river. Changing the course of a river is hard, but it can be done. And if you think about it, the course almost invariably is changed by the outliers. Jesus and the Buddha, Lincoln and Gandhi and MLK, Joan of Arc, the young Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan. All these women and men were looked upon as being different. And because of this difference, some were revered, some were persecuted, most were assassinated. But these outliers, each of them pushed for justice and each made their mark on history. Of course, these individuals were the giants among us. Each moved the river like a flash flood. Most of us are not giants and likely never will be. But we can move the river, maybe just an inch at a time, with each of us doing our own little bit. In India, there is a saying that for every mighty swing of the blacksmith's hammer, the goldsmith taps 1,000 times. But each creates an object of value. If Jesus and the Buddha and Gandhi and MLK swung a blacksmith hammer, we are the goldsmiths. We each have a little hammer that we can tap for justice. And that is why we gather here every Sunday. We gather to remind ourselves of our values. We know that from our values come our actions. And we gather to act, for each of us to pick up our own little hammer and tap, tap, tap. For each of us to do our little bit to help bend the arc of the universe towards justice. Thank you. Let us now rise as we are able and sing the closing hymn. Number 318, We Would Be One. Today's benediction was also written by Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed, all truth, its ritual, works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. Go in peace, and thank you. Meets with your
I'm going to listen to it again. You did it? Oh, wonderful.
I know, I almost broke down during the song.
Really?
I mean, that's the problem.
I could tell. Thank you. Thank you for your words.
Tap, tap, tap.
Yeah, I was looking at you. That was for you, my friend. That was for you.